Hello everyone, hello and welcome back. It's me. I'm back from the grave. I'm mostly back from the grave, maybe about half back from the grave. A lot of you already know I've been quite ill the past couple of weeks, but I'm on the upswing, on the way back up. We'll soon be back to our regular delirious self and back to our regular programming. So apologies to everyone that I've been a bit of a ghost for the past couple of weeks, but I'm alive, I am here, and we are doing another lore tour of Sohr Kai. Better late than never. I know 3.3 has been out for a few months now, but I really wanted to do this one for a lot of obvious reasons. So what are we doing here firstly? Well, Emmerich has decided to personally beseech the aid of Hraesvelgr in defeating the Shade of Nidhogg, and after a few stirring speeches by Emmerich, by ourselves, well no, not by ourselves, I think we had one line which had really no impact whatsoever. That's neither here nor there. Alphinaud had a speech, even Midgardsormr had a speech, so how about that? And Hraesvelgr has finally agreed to give us an opportunity to prove ourselves, basically to be possessing of strong enough will to stand against Nidhogg. Sohr Kai literally means, in the dragon tongue, sad apology. It's the previous abode of Ratatoskr, now converted into a sacred memorial by Hraesvelgr. Churning Mists. We're in the Churning Mists, obviously, on the far side of Zenith. You'll be able to see Zenith in the background a couple of times. Now, we had the Cloud Gardener back there. Had the same model as the Singularity Fragments, which also appeared in this patch in the Ozma fight in Weeping City. I'm not sure whether there's a lore reason for that, but I suspect that what's going on here is that Hraesvelgr is basically just animated pieces of the ruin itself as golems to tend to the upkeep of Sohr Kai, hence the title Gardener. It seems that although there hasn't been any sort of large-scale restoration made here, like what the Mughals are currently attempting around Zenith, Hraesvelgr, all the same, has taken pains to preserve the site as a memorial for his sister, and is subsequently in better condition, or at least much cleaner than most of the rest of the Churning Mists. Now, the names of each of these areas, they seem to refer to some aspect of the betrayal of Ratatoskr. So where we are at the moment is called Sudden Torment, referring to the unexpected and inexplicable murder. Now, we missed a couple of things back there that will, I'm pretty sure we're coming up to more of them in a moment, so it's not so important. But we have here the Melaya and the Sancchini. I know these are both enemy types I've talked about in previous lore tours, but I'm sure we have some new people with us today that haven't seen any of the older videos, so I think it's probably worth reiterating. The Melaya were nymphs of the ash tree in Greek mythology, born from the blood of Kronos, along with the giants and the Furies. This is obviously where the reference comes from. Subsequently, Meliaceae is also the scientific term for the mahogany family of trees. And the Sancchini, other than being used to make Mughal baskets, is more or less the Hindu equivalent of the Meliae, a mischievous spirits that live inside trees. There's the Bengali folktale about a wife who clumsily bumps against a Sancchini's tree whilst out fetching water. So the spirit grabs her and stuffs her through a hollow into the trunk of the tree, and then takes her form and spends the next several months impersonating her. Which is, I guess, you know, whatever you're into. Basically doing all of the same wifely things, only more efficiently. Cooking and cleaning and stuff like that, much better. Until eventually the husband catches her doing something ghostly, like walking through a wall or something like that, and so he beats her with a shoe until she gives him his original wife back, who is at this point very close to death. I'm really not sure what the tale is trying to convey, other than perhaps if your wife seems too good to be true, then she probably is actually a ghost or demon. Seems like a pretty cynical message to me, but I don't know, who am I to judge? Question of the day: have you ever had a partner that seemed perfect in every way and then actually turned out to be some kind of supernatural creature, like a ghost or a vampire, maybe a werewolf? I mean, werewolf, if that's what you're into. Personally, I wouldn't be surprised if I found out a couple of my exes were... Anyway, that's neither here nor there. An answer of sorrow and unsevered despair. We've come through still more lamentations at the fate of Ratatoskr. Anyway, we have, of course, Chieftain Moglin here. It's obviously no accident that this fight, this music, and this character all reek of the good king Mogl Mog the 12th. We know that primals tend to be based on the deification of a real-life figure, and the Mughals of the Twelves would believe that King Mog helped them to escape from the heavens once the gods grew violent. So this myth is probably referring to an exodus of Mughals instigated by their then chieftain, either at the start of the Dragon Song War, or perhaps earlier still, when the Elezen first encountered the Dravanians before peace was brokered by Shiva and Hraesvelgr. Moglin is showing up here because Hraesvelgr, as we know, is the patron of the Mughals, of the Churning Mists. They have a kind of concord with him, and they've evidently decided that if Hraesvelgr means to test us, they ought to contribute, once again thinking that they're being far more helpful and productive than they really are. Now, fun fact, we learned doing Mughal stuff in the Churning Mists that despite this place being the original abode of Ratatoskr, that Thal Kash, the north of the Churning Mists, was in fact where the bulk of her brood were living. Between that fact and the massive corrupted crystal there, and the sightseeing log positing that something very powerful probably died there. If you're guessing that Thal Kash is the site where Ratatoskr was actually killed, I think you're probably right. Now, there is something that we missed back there. Buzzards, they're pretty obvious. You know, you've got your medium-sized bird of prey. They're closely related to hawks. Let's talk about what did we miss? Let me think. The garden cloud trap and the sanctuary skippers. Not much to say about them. They're obviously wild flora and fauna. But we also had the enchanted fans back there, and they looked very similar to their iteration in Final Fantasy V, but in here they're clearly gilded in the form of Shiva. We know that the ancient Ishgardians revered her, and that Hraesvelgr has done his best to preserve any surviving statues or icons of her around the Churning Mists. It's really unclear what kind of purpose or function those fans are serving, and the design seems more like something we'd see in Charlene or Alexander than anything that has been yet associated with ancient Ishgard. So if I had to guess, I'd say that they're originally probably just decorative, perhaps been reprogrammed since by Hraesvelgr to defend this place in some kind of, I don't know, being wistful in a weird way. It is a really weird thing, isn't it? Having statues of your dead wife roaming around the place. Anyway, we've got cockerels here. Cockerels, of course, are the child forms of cocks. Roosters, that is. Anzu, this is an interesting one. Anzu is, well, once again, we've discussed in other places, but is also known as Zu or Indagud, and it appears in various Mesopotamian mythologies as a demonic man-bird who steals from the gods the Tablet of Destinies, otherwise known as the Tups Amati, an artifact which effectively conferred the power to rule the universe onto the wielder, and is of course also the name of Louis Soir's overpowered staff. Now, the Babylonian gods fought over the Tups Amati quite a bit, and for good reason, but I believe that Anzu was the only creature to ever possess it who was not strictly a god. I think it's quite interesting, and probably not a coincidence, that we have these parallels between Anzu and Louis Soir as both being mortal creatures having possessed the Tups Amati, and subsequently the power of gods. And then the Benus, spawned by Louis Soir in the form of the Phoenix in his fight in turn 12, and of course we now have the Bennu mount. They use the very same model as the Zeus and the Anzus in Final Fantasy XIV, and I really don't think that's a coincidence. Anyway, I'm going to take a sip of my coffee here, and we'll probably just skip ahead a little bit. Ratatoskr's piece. Well, we can see the bronze seal of Ratatoskr in the middle there, and it is the very same depiction as the woodblock printed depiction of her in the cutscenes of 3.0, if you remember, that described the Ishgardians' betrayal with Hraesvelgr's commentary. And it makes me wonder who exactly printed those and where they physically are now, given that they contain some pretty damning evidence against the church. Anyway, we just killed a couple of Sunahale The Sanahail is a gigantic humanoid vulture demon from the folklore of the Native American Navajo tribe, which carries diseases and curses across the world. And that Kargas, I think it must be Kargas, is essentially the old nomadic Turkic equivalent of a roc or a griffin. It's also the etymology for the modern Turkish word karga for crow. Pokiraj, or Pokira, we have here, is the Bengali name for a flying wooden horse from a fairy tale of the same title. It's basically the Persian Pegasus. It was built by a crafty old inventor for the king of Persia, and on a test flight by the prince, who had been so far unconvinced that it wasn't merely an illusion, it carried him to Bengal, where he broke into the chambers of a princess, fell in love with her before being caught by the Bengali king, whom agreed to let him face 10,000 soldiers in combat the next day, rather than executing him outright, from which the prince escaped by asking that he at least be allowed to fight mounted on his horse, upon which he promptly flew away, only to return to kidnap the Bengal princess under the cover of darkness the following night and carry her back to Persia to marry. Back in Persia, however, the inventor of the Pokiraj decided to kidnap the kidnapped princess and take her to Greece, where he was captured and beheaded by a Greek king who subsequently also kidnapped the double-kidnapped princess with intent to marry her. The princess pretended to be sick to delay him from sleeping with her until she was kidnapped once again by the first guy, the Persian prince, whom had been looking for her and had come to the court of the Greek king disguised as a healer, claiming to be able to heal her from this mystery sickness, and kidnapped her once again. She's been, kidnapped 4 or 5 times now, but that was the last time. Took her back to Persia, married her, and they lived happily ever after. I think the moral of the story is that, I think it's basically saying that women are commodities, and if you kidnap them often enough, eventually it will stick. I think. That's not me, that's not my words. I think that's really just what the story is trying to convey. Well, that and not to trust engineers. Anyway, that is Pokiraj, dead and done, unstifled prayer. Those sweet esoterics, which I have no use for at the moment. And we are moving into an answer of shame. And can we just talk for a minute about how Hraesvelgr, we're coming up to here, he sent his broodlings to fight us. I mean, what's going on there? Are we just killing his baby dragons? And he's okay with that? He's not even gonna flinch? That can't be right, can it? I mean, no, surely we're just knocking them out, right? They're just gonna stay there? They're not gonna... I think we must be knocking them out. We're just knocking them on... Oh, that one's disappeared though. I mean, Emmerich and Alphinaud, they didn't actually kill Vidofnir and Vidofulnir, and we didn't actually kill Moglin, so surely we're not just casually slaughtering Hraesvelgr's babies here, right? Although that could be one reason that it's only Vidofnir and Vidofulnir that show up on the Steps of Faith with Hraesvelgr to help us. Sorry about that noise in the background there. I thought I had those notifications muted. Yeah, that really bothered me for some reason. It was only those two showing up on the Steps of Faith. That and the fact that the Dragoons weren't present either. But I think it turns out that the Dragoons were actually on a mission in the Churning Mist to basically interrupt and divide Nidhogg's forces. So they actually have a legitimate excuse. Anyway, we have some generic wyverns here. I'm not sure why they're holy, but it might be that they're surviving children of Ratatoskr's brood and therefore treated with reverence by those of Hraesvelgr. It might also just refer to their alignment with the astral pole as opposed to Nidhogg, as evidently umbral. It's unclear here, but it seems that wyverns are, in Eorzea, generally an adolescent or young adult form of dragon that might over another couple of thousand years come to take the form of a worm. That's my working hypothesis at the moment anyway, that dragons become more physically varied as they age, and that the wyvern is perhaps one of those earlier and more homogeneous stages that comes after the broodling. That would make these more worm-like models of dragon that we're fighting here older still. And like I say, they seem to develop with variable appearances and variable abilities. Variable elemental affinities, perhaps associated with the environment they grew up in, and subsequently, I guess, the primary alignment of the ether that their bodies and eyes have absorbed. Just a thought. Oh, that's a cold coffee. That's a very cold coffee. Anyway, I think we've made pretty decent time. I always expect this late in a patch that when you're running dungeons, they're going to be the slowest they've ever been, but this tank, he's not too bad. He's not too bad. So we're now coming up to, I think this is, was it Shattered Remembrance? Is that right? Please tell me I'm right. Shattered Remembrance, there it is, there we go. And Hraesvelgr himself, one of the first brood of Midgardsormr, almost as old as Hydaelyn, along with Nidhogg, Ratatoskr, Bahamut, Tiamat, and another 2 as yet unnamed children of Midgardsormr to make up 7 that almost definitely include Shinryu, given the references that we've been seeing to Omega Weapon. Let's be real, we all saw this fight coming. I think it's a really great fight for a dungeon boss. I really don't want anything more from it. I know some people have been saying that they'd love to see an extreme mode version of this, a minstrel's ballad version of this. Personally, I don't think I'd really be into that. I think that this arena and these kinds of mechanics would just be really frustrating in an extreme mode for melee DPS in particular. So maybe that's just me being selfish, but I don't know. I like my fights to be approachable on any class. Anyway, I did a dedicated video on Hraesvelgr, Nidhogg, and Ratatoskr just a few months ago, and I talked at length about their mythological background there, so if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. I think it was a great video. Speaking objectively, of course, no biases whatsoever there. But to give you the short of it, Hraesvelgr is a name mentioned in the Old Norse poem Vafthrudnismal, which is an absolute pain to pronounce. I'll put the word up on the screen now and see if any of you think you could actually say that. Unless you're Icelandic or Germanic, in which case you're cheating, and good for you. So it's the name for a giant that takes the form of an eagle and produces all of the wind over the world. And so the name is conflated with the eagle that is said to perch on top of the world tree Yggdrasil, where the squirrel Ratatoskr carries messages between it and the dread serpent that lies beneath the tree's roots, Nidhogg, the devourer of corpses and sinners. So this kind of template, if you will, it translates quite nicely into Eorzea for the dichotomy between Hraesvelgr and Nidhogg, as well as the inspiration for their designs, Hraesvelgr being the distant and lofty eagle of light, and Nidhogg the cruel and darkness-dwelling devourer. And even the role that Ratatoskr might have once played in the Final Fantasy universe. Anyway, shout out to Soken going absolutely ham on that piano here. I can only assume that that was him in the recording. I can't imagine him leaving that to anyone else. And wow, he really killed it again this patch with all the arrangements. But this thing should be dropping in a minute. So there is Sohr Khai for you all. Thank you again. I'm really sorry, but thank you again for being patient with me over the last couple of weeks and continuing to support the channel. Like I said, I'm back on my feet now, more or less. I'm sure I do still sound a little bit shaky, but like I said, I'm on the upswing. We'll be picking up momentum over the next couple of weeks and should be back to our regular schedule very soon. So expect to see something new in the next few days. I hope you enjoy it, and thank you all very much for watching. Cheerio.